Nunesdea, a facilitator from the IAF, which stands for International Association of Facilitators. Since 2018, I've started a book series on architecting collaboration, and my latest book, in co-authorship with Martin Duffy and other renowned digital facilitators and guest co-authors, is titled Beyond Virtual Meetings. It's all about the importance of the digital tools that can extend and augment the power of you as a facilitator and a meeting host in virtual online meetings, but also on the hybrid meetings that are going to be so much needed in this post-pandemic era. Along with my co-author Martin Duffy and his team PhD colleague, we host Talk to Your Meeting Daughters, a series of hosted conversations with meeting experts that can advise you about how to transition to this new normal and take advantage of this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the organization of your meetings more sustainable and effective. Please stand by as the next show will start momentarily.
Notes, but I've been trying to mentally track, I guess, the conversation that we've had so far. We started like our theme of measuring productivity versus performance, and I suppose that's where we separated out the idea of performance versus productivity. And I think it's fair to say that we came to the rough conclusion that productivity is relatively easy because it's quantitative, but performance, while performance can be reflected in the quantitative, it doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. And because it's not telling us the whole story, that then brought us into the conversation of monitoring or managing performance versus productivity of the collective versus the contribution of individuals to that collective. And I think that was partly, Michael, where you brought in the hypo or hypo, which I love that particular idea as well. That partly reflected into the anecdote I provided myself of the person who contributes least may, in some instances, actually contribute most when measured from a slightly different perspective. So I guess that then brought us into our conversation about the time frame over which we choose to measure things. So if we're measuring against very short term, and Michael, you gave us the wonderful example of a 3-week piece of work that quantitatively can get measured against a report, a box ticked, but actually under the surface, we might discover not such a well-functioning team, probably not a team that's going to come back together again, probably an investment of time and resource that actually may not have produced nearly as much long-term productivity as we might have reasonably expected. So that concept of if we measure something over a very short time versus over a very long period, how we go about measuring that, we need to be careful about so that we actually measure, I suppose, the most indicative elements that are going to differentiate between the individual's performance versus the collective team performance. I think it's probably fair to say, in summary of our discussion, it's not as simple as just count the number of widgets that were produced at the end of the production line. When we come to the human person people dynamic, and I think this is a key point, Sue, that you brought out, was we are absolutely people before we are machines. And in being people, measuring what we do, how we do it, and then more importantly, and Sue, I'm now leaning back into something you said, how we do it in conjunction with other people now becomes a really important challenge, so that we then focus on measuring the correct things in the most appropriate way. And it may not always be about quantitative. In fact, it probably won't be always only about quantitative. And we just need to be cautious that we don't measure the wrong thing and end up getting a potentially wrong result.
absolutely. Martin, I think we are reaching out our time. Our viewers will be eager to stay with us for another hour or so, but I'm sure we have plenty of stuff to do after this cup of coffee, watching us on LinkedIn or on our social media channels where we are showing this interesting conversation so far. So what have we learned about the art of hosting face-to-face meetings so far, and the wrap up on the program today?
What a whirlwind. Where would I start? We need to get AI to do the analysis, Paul.
There you go. That too.
let me have a crack at it. We started by suggesting, Kirsty, you pitched in first saying maybe we're out of practice with the face-to-face meetings. What we discovered was that the virtual meetings that we attended, particularly during the pandemic, probably gave all of us a degree of respite that allowed us to switch off cameras, switch off microphones, take a pause, step back, scream at the camera without anybody knowing that we were screaming. And we had to rehabituate ourselves back into face-to-face. But then we very quickly changed tack. We said, do we actually have face-to-face expertise in meetings? And that brought us onto a completely different track, and a really interesting track. So a couple of things that came out of that. We basically talked about meeting leadership, meeting management, and we used our own personal anecdotes and so on to explore the idea that just because you're the leader doesn't mean you have to be the chair. If you are going to be the chair, are we presupposing a particular type of meeting? And does that cover all possible types of meetings? And I think we pretty much agreed, well, actually, it does presuppose, and we have to chair every meeting, but we have to manage our meetings. So that brought us into the whole area of preparation for meetings, pre-planning for meetings, the importance of setting the outcome before we ever get into the beginning of the meeting. So we explored that a little bit. Kirsty, you took us into the purpose, the outcome, the structure, and the time, POST, as a simple but really illuminating acronym for, if you answer those 4 key questions in preparation, there's a very, very good chance that you're going to have the right people, the right time, and you're going to have the right. We then talked a little bit about post-action reviews. We drifted into the military a little bit. We talked about aviation, which I brought in because that's my own personal professional background. We talked about evaluation apprehension as a possible reason why many organizations don't seem to reflect on their meetings. And we very briefly explored why that might be. And I suggested an idea that Edward de Bono actually came up with, which is the use of plus minus interesting as a really simple tool, a bit like POST in preparing for meetings. Well, maybe we can have a PMI at the meeting to evaluate in a safe way, but in a slightly self-critical way. Critical positive, critical negative, but equally critical, did anything interesting come up? We then segued, we did a major left turn, I think was the way you called it, Joe. And we started to talk about AI. And I'm certain we could be here for another 3 or 4 hours talking in the direction that we had started to go. But I leave it at that. I hope that's a reasonably faithful and quick summary of some of the key points that we managed about in a really interesting discussion.
Absolutely, Martin. Thank you so much for summarizing this. We'll compare now with our AI note taker and we'll judge. Everybody in this meeting will be able to judge that. So final word, golden nugget. Kirsty, Joe, what do you have to share with our viewers here on LinkedIn? Perhaps they will be looking for you guys as meeting doctors to help them on their meetings. Can I have a golden nugget from both of you to close these today?
I think Joe's taught me something about me, which is evaluation apprehension. So thank you, Joe. That was, you've named something for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that.
Yeah. And Kirsty, thank you for POST, because that was a great acronym that speaks it's very similar to the two questions I always tell people to ask themselves when they're about to schedule a meeting. One, does the meeting have a purpose? If you say yes, ask the second question, which is, does that meeting require collaboration? Or does that purpose require collaboration? If you say yes to both of those, proceed to schedule your meeting. If you say no to either one, stop it.
Yeah, yeah.
You probably don't need a meeting.
Love it.
Okay, guys,
Super.
so this is about it. That I hope that you enjoyed the program with us today, and please stay with us. As next month, we're going to expand on this conversation and bringing AI into the field. That's all for now, and thank you so much for watching.